Okay, well, it's good to have our first share in person in this thing. What? Yeah, with me in the cage. That's okay.
What is your preferred name?
It's okay. I have oxygen out here. I don't know. I don't know if I like Rabbi Ginsburg's Eichmann cage, Eichmann box, even though that's what it looks like, admittedly. I think the Hebrew for it is shkupta, right? Because it's shakuf, it's see-through, and ta, it's a case. Just clear case or box. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to transition from the shofar-only one to a bit of a broader issue. So, as we mentioned in passing, the Gezeirah of Rabbah doesn't only limit our shofar blowing, as we know from this past Shabbos, where we didn't blow shofar, but it also limits taking the lulav on Shabbos as well, right? It's a more expansive claim. And in general, this type of Gezeirah forces us to ask the question, when do Chazal choose to limit the performance of biblical mitzvahs? If you can't hear me at any point, just let me know. Okay. When do they choose to do that? Because obviously they don't choose to do that all the time. And, maybe a meta-analysis just for a second is worth noting. But, I've heard many people over the last 6-7 months point out, and I think it's really important to think about it this way, that you get a better understanding of Chazal's Gezerot and the complexity of Gezerot when you look at how hard it's been to set up coronavirus restrictions, right? Because everything is a balance between, on the one hand, we recognize a danger. On the other hand, there's a danger in being too protective, right? And you constantly are balancing this. You're also constantly balancing the reality that not everyone will listen if you tell them the real rule is, right? If you tell people this is the real thing that will be healthy, right? You know that you can't do that, right? So realistically, is it totally safe for someone to, be outside at a distance from somebody without a mask? Yes, everybody knows that that's perfectly safe, right? Why is it that in Israel they say wear the mask? Because it's not safe to have your hand over someone's shoulder, breathing into their face. But right, that if you tell people, well, you can be at a distance in public without a mask, right, then that distance goes from 10 feet to, well, I know you said 6 feet, but maybe that was because you were, that was the Chazon Ish here, and then, Reb Chaim Noah, and whatever, is it 4 feet, and then, whatever, and, it's my cousin, and, and you realize that, setting up Gezeirah to protect biblical law, or to protect anything, is very complicated, right? And it's always a cost-benefit analysis, right? And sometimes you have to, I mentioned this to a few guys in Seder, sometimes you actually have to live with risk, right? So, the example I gave was, it is obviously the case that it is more dangerous to go into a hospital, and the risk of catching something in a hospital is higher than, nagid, in a lot of other places, a well-spaced restaurant, let's say. But why is it that even with shutting down the restaurants, I can still go to the hospital? Because the cost of not letting people go to the hospital is higher, right? And it's a cost we can't live with, right? That doesn't mean that we're not acknowledging the risk, right? I went into Shari said, I'm telling you, I panic, right? It's like, everyone's, look, when I went to the mandatory meeting in the NICU, right? I went because on the level of things that are important to do, mandatory meeting in the NICU is important. But obviously that was more dangerous when the person from a red city sat next to me, took off her mask, and coughed. Right? That was really bad. Right? But I went because I wouldn't take the same risk. I haven't gone into a minyan in shul and since, I think, Shushan Purim. Right? Because I can daven from outside. Right? Obviously that's safer. Right? But if I can have an alternative, I can daven from outside, I'll do that. And when you look at Gezeirah, I want you to understand that that's what really Chazal are trying to do. Is that on the one hand, they're trying to deal with risk, but they're also recognizing cost. Right? There was an excellent article a few years ago by Rabbi Yuval Sherlow, who was a Rosh Hashiva in what at the time was Yeshivat Petach Tikva. It's no longer. It's moved to Kfar Batya, which is part like Ranana essentially, and now it's moved to Tel Aviv. Whatever it is. Now it's a road show. And he was asked to weigh in on the restrictions that the government should put on the choosing of sex when doing IVF. Right? Should there be any restrictions? And the concern is basically that it'll lead to eugenics, which by now everyone's talking about with CRISPR, because CRISPR is essentially eugenics, right? If you know CRISPR. If not, we can talk about CRISPR another time, but it's basically, yeah.
You can choose which genes you go.
Exactly, right? CRISPR is like the basically custom gene editing, and just very quickly and cheaply as things go. And at the time he said, well, he said, let's assume that we all agree that choosing the sex because, let's say, you know that in your family you have a disease that runs on the Y chromosome, right? You have a male, right? A male dominant gene disease, so you want to only have girls, right? We can all basically agree that that's probably fundamentally an okay reason to choose to only have girls, right? Choosing to only have boys because you hate girls, or whatever, or right, that's a bad thing. So how do you set up policies that will make sure that, and then there's like middle cases, right? In Israel, the middle cases were essentially people who have 4 boys and want a girl or something, or vice versa, or the interesting case that actually brought it to the Supreme Court here, and that's when they actually made the laws, was a Kohen who was impotent, and his wife was getting donor sperm and didn't want everybody to know that the kids he was raising were not actually his kids. And if they were males, it would be obvious because they wouldn't be able to duchen with him. So he only wanted girls, right? So this was like the middle case that came to the Supreme Court. No, he got it from not Kohen, right? But if it's a girl, people won't know, because what's the nafkamina that a girl is a bat Kohen? But if it was a boy, everyone would know that it's not really his child, right? And he didn't want everyone to know. So this was the case that made it to the Supreme Court. So at the time, Rav Shurlo said, look, basically, Gezeirah balanced 3 factors, what he called in Hebrew sikui, sikun, and mechir, right? Which was chance, likelihood, and cost. Meaning, and he took 5 rabbinic principles, and then I'll get into this, right? He said, look, the first question you have to figure out when you make a Gezeirah is, let's say you don't make the Gezeirah, how likely is it that the bad result will happen? That's the first question you've got to figure out. If it's likely, so then it's worth protecting it. If it's unlikely, it's not. And he said, how do I know that Chazal care about that?
I guess they didn't prohibit matzah.
Well, so his easy answer is a rule that Chazal set out, which is, Kol milsa d'lo shchicha l'gazu be'rabanan. Kol milsa d'lo shchicha l'gazu be'rabanan. Anything which is uncommon, rabbis don't bother setting up Gezeirot for. Right? Which tells you that Chazal only worried about things that are likely. If it's going to happen once in a million, Chazal don't care. Yeah.
These things also apply if you were to be reasoning for the removal of Gezeirah?
So removal of Gezeirah is a bit more complicated once it's in place.
Yeah.
Right? Because that was the subject of Shlomo Brody, who you'll meet at some point, of his dissertation, of when we actually say that and when we don't. When we actually, because technically you're not supposed to uproot a takana unless you have a bezdin, which is gadol menu v'chacham of a minyan. We don't always do that. Sometimes we seem to overrule it even when it does, and when we do, when we don't, it's very complicated. No one really has a good answer, right? The Baalei Tosfot tried to figure it out. No one really knows.
What are these 3 things?
They're a little bit different, because once something's in place, it's harder to get rid of Gezeirah, even if it's nonsensical, right? Because of formality. The second factor he called was, right? The second issue is how bad would it be if that happened, right? So. And he noted that, so for example, the poskim say that if something is in Isser Karet, sometimes we'll have Gezeirah l'Gezeirah, right? Sorry, Gezeirah l'Gezeirah was his other option, right? Was like, Gezeirah l'Gezeirah, you see that we don't make a Gezeirah l'Gezeirah for 2 reasons. One is because we don't protect a rabbinic law with another rabbinic law, because what's the worst that'll happen? You'll break a rabbinic law, the cost is not so high. Also, the chance that it'll violate the D'oraisa, which is the real concern, is very low once it's 2 levels removed. Right, so on both tests it fails. But Beis Yosef quotes many Rishonim who say that if it's in Isser Kares, so it goes in Gezeirah l'Gezeirah. Why? Because Isser Kares is very, very bad. Right? The other thing where we set up Gezeirah l'Gezeirah, or very unlikely Gezeirah in halacha, is sakana. because chamira sakanta miyisura. We're more worried that people will die, so we set up, what seemed like outlandish Gezeirah. Yeah.
How would that second apply in the modern day when things like that punishments don't really exist?
It's not about punishment; it's about the severity from a fundamental standpoint.
How do we measure the severity?
So, by what punishment it would get? Yeah. And the third thing he said was mechir, right? Is that even if it's worth setting up a Gezeirah, if the cost is too high, sometimes we won't do it. So, for example, Chazal say b'makom tsar lo gazer be'rabanan, right? Sometimes something which is usher, if it's too painful, we won't set up the Gezeirah, right? Even though we're worried that it'll lead to the malacha or whatever it might be, it's just that it's not worth the cost. Because every time you set up a prohibition, which is not fundamentally usher, you set up a Gezeirah, there's a cost to that. So, this sort of in the background, right? That every Gezeirah is a push and pull between recognizing the cost that every Gezeirah imposes, the real protective function it has, but the recognition that has to be a limitation. And again, you see this in Corona, right? Where I understand why you would shut a hospital, but I can't shut a hospital, right? I understand why you might want to shut down the economy totally, but we're not going to because the cost of the economy the first time we shut down was a 20% unemployment rate. So now we're trying to have this half-baked lockdown where anyone who's an oved chiyuni is allowed to go in, right? Why are we doing that? Isn't it more dangerous? Yes, but the cost to the country of going from 20% unemployment to 40% unemployment might be worse, right? And all decrees. And I also note, there was an excellent article in The Atlantic a few weeks ago, I think it was The Atlantic, that pointed out that, and I think this is helpful sometimes in Chazal also, that everyone is looking for consistency, right, in coronavirus things, right? Like, if I'm willing to risk something which is level 5, then I should risk all things that are level 5, right? And it said, no, really the opposite is true. Right? If, let's say, going to the hospital is a level 5 danger, and going to school is level 5 danger, so you might say, well, I'm comfortable going to the hospital, so I should be comfortable going to school. But that's not the way it works, right? Because if I go to the hospital and then I go to school, right, I'm doubly likely to infect everybody, right? So if I have to take the risk of going to the hospital, I should actually minimize the risks I take in other cases. I should be actively inconsistent, meaning I should only... And sometimes in Gezeirah you'll find that things are inconsistent. The reason is because you can't forbid everything, right? So you have to make a choice. That doesn't always make sense, right? It might be that if maybe I should forbid everything, but since you can't, you have to make choices. And what you'll see that everyone here, when they're trying to figure out why don't we make Gezeirah and everything, they're struggling because there seems to be certain inconsistencies. Right, but you can't forbid everything. And the question is, what can you and what can't you forbid? Right? Now, some of them are fundamental limitations, and some of them are just recognition that there has to be a limit, 2 limits. Yeah?
It's just like a comment, like in general, I don't like using inconsistencies that way. It's more the appearance of things.
The appearance of inconsistency, correct.
It is still, like it's still a consistent thing with limiting the spread.
Correct. Oh, correct. Meaning it's
consistent, but it appears.
Meaning it's consistent in the sense that we have an overall goal, and we recognize that we can't do, I'll put it differently, it's inconsistent in the sense that if our only goal in life was to eliminate coronavirus, right, and we saw the best way of doing that was to limit people from going to any place which is danger from level 5 and up, right, in that sense it's inconsistent to let people go to one and not the other. But if you say, no, our goal is to keep society safe, and coronavirus is risking people's health, but so is everything else that people go to the hospital for, and therefore we can't realistically tell people not to go to the hospital, so then we have to be inconsistent in our concern for coronavirus because our real concern is broader than that, right? Which is the overall well-being of society, and it's a push and pull, right? Meaning, you're right, it's consistent, meaning logically it's consistent. It's just not consistent in the sense that you're not making a blanket rule, right? That's what I mean. And that's the problem with, and when you recognize that, and I think it's helpful just to think about this because you recognize that fundamentally, takanot by definition are messy. Because, as Jonathan points out, it's consistent in the sense that our ultimate goal is to ensure that the most number of people keep the Torah as possible. And to do that, we set a protective Gezeirah. But we can't tell you, lock yourself in your room, except when you must go out to do a mitzvah, because then you're less likely to see something not sanua. Right? That's not a possibility. Right? That's not a possibility. That doesn't mean you don't care about tzniut. That doesn't mean you don't care about whatever the case might be. Right? It just means that life is complex, and we set up Gezeirah with a broader view in mind, right? And that's why it's important to ask. Well, okay, so now let's come back to it. Once you recognize things are messy, so then when did Chazal not choose in our particular case? Right? Let's now bring it back to the very local, specific case. Gezeirah D'Rabba says, sometimes we're so worried that you're going to violate Shabbos that we're willing to tell you to not perform a mitzvah d'oraita. Right? That's how worried we are. Right? And on balance, we're willing to say that the possibility that a single person might travel in a Rosh Hashanah with his shofar to learn from the expert, who was our local shofar blower? It was Yaakov? To go to Yaakov and Gavi. They're going to go to Yaakov and Gavi to learn how to blow the shofar. And in their zeal to learn how to blow the shofar, they're going to forget that, I don't know, Emek Achula is a Reshus HaRabim D'Oraisa. Okay? That's not a psak. That's just a theoretical. Okay? I don't know if it is or isn't. I haven't really thought about it too much. I know I wouldn't carry in it, but that's a different story. That's not... how worried about we that there'll be that one person who will go and will, find them and carry a shofar. We're worried enough about that it's worth telling the entire world never blow shofar on Shabbos. Right? Well, once you're willing to say that, however you came with that calculus, once you're willing to make that calculus, so you've got to ask, okay, if I'm willing to make that calculus, then why didn't I make it in more? Right? Meaning if the concern that someone might violate Shabbos is so great, that I'm willing to ban everybody from blowing shofar and everybody from shaking lulav on Shabbos, except for in the Beis HaMikdash. So then, why? Right? Are there limits? And there clearly are limits because we don't do it to everything. So what are the limits? Right? That's the fundamental tension that everyone's trying to figure out, which is once you have gone down this rabbit hole, right? Why? How is there a limit? What's the limit conceptually? Right? Where is that limit? Right? This was Rami's question already, like 2 weeks ago. But this is right the background, really, of what is going on. Right? And again, the Rishonim may not spell it out the way I just did. Right? But this is what's going on. Is the question of jurisprudence of not really. This is not jurisprudence of legislation. Right, of legislation and how and what factors you weigh in messy legislation, it's very hard, right? And that's why you've got to struggle with it and figure out, okay, well, what do you do, right? How do you play this out? So let's go through some of the answers and let's try to tease out what they're saying. Okay, good. So let's start with the Ritva. Okay, first let's get biography down. Who is the Ritva? What's his actual name? Yeah, you got Yom Tov, yeah. Yom Tov bar Avram al-Hasvili, right? Al-Hasvili is just the Hebrew way of saying from Seville. He lived in Seville, right? Al-Hasvili he's from Seville. Yes, Spain. Very good. So he is. Which Beit Midrash is he from? Right, which group of Rishonim does he go with? Who's his Rebbe's Rebbe? Let's start with the Beit Midrash starts with his Rebbe's Rebbe. Who's? No. You're in Spain, man. The Ramban. Right, his Rebbe's Rebbe is the Ramban. Now, people often incorrectly say that his Rebbe is the Rashba. It's not fully true. He is a generation after the Rashba. Right, but his main Rebbe is not actually the Rashba; it's the Ra'ah. Right? A few generations after Rashi. No, many generations after Rashi, several hundred years. No, right? Rashba? No, Rashbam. Rashbam. I'm going to chalk it up to this plastic. They didn't hear what I said, so that's fine. No, it could very well be. So, okay, right? Okay, let's do a quick biography, right?
Rashba has nothing to do with Rashi's line.
Wrong Rashba. There is another Rashba. You are correct. If you mean the other Rashba, yes, but not this Rashba. There's the Ashkenazi Rashba and the Sephardi Rashba. Dam Lekav Schut here. Okay, fine. Okay, Rashi. Okay, the Balei HaTosafot are basically the sons-in-law, grandsons, and on from Rashi, right? So Rashi is mid 11th century, right? So 1000s, right? Then his grandsons, his sons-in-law, grandsons are the Balei HaTosafot, and then their children and students are like the expanding. But like the main Balei HaTosafot are his sons-in-law and grandsons. People like the Ram, his grandsons, the Rashbam, right? Rabbeinu Tam, the Ri, right? Those are his grandchildren. Okay, and then it goes on. There is one Rishon, there is one Balei HaTosafot, the Rashba, which may be what you're referring to, Rav Shimon bar Avram, right? Who's Rav Shimshon bar Avram, right? Who's also known as the Rosh Mishan, so Shimshon of Sens, right? So he's the Rashba, if I'm getting that right? But there is a Balei HaTosafot Rashba. But normally when we refer to Rashba, we mean the Sephardi Rashba, who's a Talmud of the Ramban. Okay? So the Ramban is two main Talmidim that we talk of, really. The Rashba and the Ra'ah. Right? Rashba is Rosh ben Aderet, and the Ra'ah is Rav Aaron HaLevi. Right? And the Ra'ah's Talmud is the Ritva. Okay? So this is 2 generations after the Ramban. And that's what we're talking about. Okay? It is true, and maybe this is what Yudi meant, that slowly but surely the Balei HaTosafot influence the Beit Midrash of the Ramban, and by the time you get to the Ritva is heavily influenced by Balei HaTosafot, because the Ramban quotes Balei HaTosafot sometimes, and the Rashba a little bit more, but it seems to be that by the time you get to the Ritva actually had collections of Tosafos works and quotes from them heavily in a way that his Rebbeim don't. It seems to be that he had access to Tosafos Rebbeinu Peretz, which is itself a compendium of the Balei HaTosafot. Okay? Anyways, if you didn't remember that, that's fine. It took me to get that down. It took me graduate school. On Thursday, I shot an email to my professor from graduate school, Professor Kannerfogel, who's one of the world experts in the Balei HaTosafot.
Rabbi Comfortable?
Yeah.
I don't. He went to my school. I had the opportunity.
You're from Teaneck?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
he's a genius. Wow.
he is. So if people don't know yet, right? Meaning when Ora and I were first married, we were both in this graduate class together, and since then Ora's been obsessed with it, and I've gone along. I can't say unwillingly. I'm okay with this shtick, right? Of naming all of our children after Balei HaTosafot, right? So all of our children except for our second is named for a Balei HaTosafot, except for Aaron, because what? Well, I mean, he was named for Rav Lichtenstein because he was born right after Rav Aaron passed away, and so and we were living in Olenshut at the time. But everyone else is named for Balei HaTosafot. So Meir is the Marami Rutenberg, right? It's my oldest, and then Ezra, whose first name is actually Shmuel, is for the Rashbam, and Rav Shmuel Falej also. And Ezra technically is a Balei HaTosafot, not one that anyone knows. Ezra Hanafi of Mankantor, but whatever, not important. Yeah, but and the twins are. I got so many texts, by the way, from people who knew that I named from Balei HaTosafot, like, "Oh, girls, what are you going to do?" And which is what I told Ura, but no, both of them are named from Balei HaTosafot. What? Rabbeinu Tam, which was his nickname, right? Rabbeinu Tam is his nickname. His name is Yaakov, but he's called Tam. It's a descriptor, as it is, right? So I played it, and then Ayala is named for Yitzchak because it's a switch from the Akedah. Right, that Yitzchak is switched is from the first night of Slichot, U'Tomorrow Ayal, right? That you switch Yitzchak for Ayal, right? For Ayal, so it's a play on the Ayal of Yitzchak. Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri.
Rabash, you pointed out the other day when you were saying how Tzimmer kept stealing all the food from Ayala.
Yes, it's a switch of Yaakov and Esav. What? Yeah.
Exactly. That Yaakov also stole all that. Yaakov stole the Torah from his son.
There you go. So, yeah, anyways, I emailed Professor Kannerfogel with the new names and the descriptions. He loved it and sent me back an article for Meir to read about the Maram Rutenberg when he gets older, and the new work he's doing with the Balei HaTosafot. So, whatever. So you don't get it all clear, it's fine. But, so the Ritva. Right? So the Ritva asked this question. He's one of the earliest to ask this question. What does he say? Okay, so the Ritva, he deals with it several places on this daf. I gave you one passage, but he really says it a little bit earlier also. What is the Ritva's claim? What's the limit? When do we and when do we not set it up? So, here. Okay? So, let me read for a second from an earlier piece in the Ritva, and then we'll look at this. Let's see. Okay, so a little bit earlier in this piece, he says the following. And he says, you know what, I didn't give you that piece, so let's start here. What does the Ritva say, right? What is the Ritva's limitation? When does he think you set up Gezeirah, and when does he think you don't?
The day that you serve up there.
Yeah, when there's no doubt.
Good, so what does he say? So he says,
It's a twofold thing. It has to be. It wasn't clear whether the Deros or running.
good, so let's see what he says, right? Yuri, you want to take it?
Alright, so, and according to this sugya, we learn explicitly that you don't push off mitzvah, you don't push off mitzvah of the Torah. We shouldn't be there. We shouldn't do Gezeirah from the Gezeirah because of the Gezeirah. Ella hekla lo yadinan v'kivia diyarva from shofar. But rather where you know where you're uncertain of the set time. How would you translate this? The calendar. Right?
Yeah, we know this at the calendar, yeah.
For example, Kigod Shofar. For example, Shofar B'Chol Kodem Haforban Lulav D'man Hazeh. So, for example, Shofar in the times before Parmes and Nagash, or Lulav in this time of the writing, so now. Lo Yedinan Mikvia Yarfa Obizman Obizman Shabes HaMikdash Kain B'Makom Lo Matu Shluchim Avdei Treyoma. They didn't know the set time, or in the times of the Mikdash, when Kiyam of the Makom, where it was outside of Yerushalayim and surrounding cities where the Shluchim would reach. So in all these places where you know the set time, you push it off. Right? In other words, you have to
Right. V'hainu taima, right? Demila dachya Shabbos, right?
Right, yeah. And this is the reason, the reason for that Mila is built for Shabbos, not because of Gezeirah, because of Rabbah. We should believe Basvega, Sheshmina,
Okay, good. So let's stop here for a second. So what does he say? Right, the Ritva says, what type of Gezeiros are you allowed to make, and what can you not make?
Make the Gezeirah when there is a suffix.
Good. Right, the Ritva has this very interesting thesis, and he fleshes it out in different places on this daf, okay? Which is the following. We don't like... Well, you tell me let's see what he says, and let's try to get what he's saying, right? He says, we set up a Gezeirah when there is some sort of suffix, when there's some sort of doubt as to whether the day is right, okay? That's when we do it, and that's why, for him, we allow you to blow shofar where? In the Beis HaMikdash, because there's definitionally no suffix, because that's where there was Kiddush HaChodesh, right? But it's not 100% true, right? Meaning we do set up the Gezeirah in certain places where there's not Kfir D'Yarcha. But what is he getting at? Right? What's his real claim? Right? So what he seems to be saying is as follows. We don't like setting up Gezeirah that uproot mitzvot. Why? Why do you think? Why do we not like doing that? Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Why are you allowed to get rid of a mitzvah? So what's the petach? What's the in that Chazal have to uproot a mitzvah? So, well, no, it's not another mitzvah. What is it? we have a concern of a daraisa. That we know. But even so, the Ritva doesn't want to get rid of the daraisa. What's the Chazal's petach? Right? To sneak in the back door and say, we'll prevent you from fulfilling a mitzvah daraisa because of the concern of Shabbos. What is their opening? Yeah, Yaakov.
That since it's a spake, then it's not really deraisa.
Or it's not vadai. Meaning it's right. Meaning what the Ritva is saying is exactly. He's saying, look, if there's a calendrical uncertainty, then I can sort of get away with saying, I'm not really getting rid of the Torah law. I mean, I might be, but I don't know if I am. Right? And that is enough of an opening because, and we can say it in different ways. It could be an optics question. Right? It could just be an optics question. Right? And, lest you say, oh, that's weird. Why would you have an optics issue? But let's be fair. Right? So, meaning, it looks weird. It looks bad. Right? Right? Everyone knows. Right? Everyone knows that you don't want a law to look discriminatory, even if it's not discriminatory. Right? Right? Meaning, you don't, right? You think about what's happening now in Israel, right? Closing off the red cities is not fundamentally a discriminatory policy. It just says if you have a high corona infection, so we shut you down to try to lower the infection. But when the top 40 cities are all either Haredi or Arab, right, it looks discriminatory and it's very hard to actually get it passed because public opinion makes it hard. But once it's a few Haredi cities and a few Arab cities and a few secular cities and a few Dati Leumi cities, right, suddenly it's easier to say, we're closing down the red cities because the optics aren't as bad, right? And optics matter, right? In Gezeirah, they matter. They matter how people perceive it. So so one way to say the Ritva is simply it's an optics question, which is, look, to say Chazal came along and got rid of a mitzvah daraisa, that looks bad. But if I can say, no, I got rid of a mitzvah that might be daraisa, but maybe Rosh Hashanah is really tomorrow, so maybe today is nothing, right? It isn't, right? That's one possibility. Now, 1 second, Yonatan. No, Yonatan. But the Ritva says something fascinating. He says, therefore, what type of Gezeirah is impervious to this type of decree?
One where there is a certain that.
And but for him, what's the paradigm? It's a very clever move. Yeah? Mila, why? Very good. Because it's not based on calendar, it's based on days. Right? He says, Mila, I don't care if you know what today is. As long as you know how to count to 8, it doesn't matter. If you forgot what day of the week it is, it doesn't make a difference. Right? So Mila fundamentally is impervious from that type of confusion. And therefore, you can't forbid Mila. Even though someone might carry the knife, they might carry the water, the band-aids, the grape juice, the mashia. Right? Doesn't matter. It is. Right? It is. Now, it could be more than optics. Right? So one way of taking the Ritva is that it just looks bad. Right? We need a petach to say we're not attacking the Torah. We're, The other is to say that this is not just optics. It might be fundamental. That the rabbis view their own authority as being limited to, right, being incapable of actively uprooting a biblical law. If there's even a little petach of Kfiyat Yarcha, then they're not directly attacking the biblical law. They're, right, attacking the situation, which maybe 99% of the time is attacking biblical law. But it's a blanket law which catches some rabbinic cases, meaning when the real Rosh Hashanah was day 2, right? And some biblical cases. And that's enough, because maybe it could be that conceptually the rabbis think is we can set a decree which accidentally, or even by design, but not definitionally attacks biblical law, but we can't set something up that directly attacks biblical law, or we don't want to. Right? Yeah.
Why can't he just say that he would rather you don't violate the right to fulfill the right to just fulfill the right to.
He could say a lot of things. He could say a lot of things. This is the one he does say. Right? As I saw, there are many other answers. I don't know. This is the one, It's very hard to figure out. The Chachmei Sfard really like asking questions like what you ask, which is, right, sometimes you'll notice in the Chachmei Sfard, they'll say, Rashi Nishmar Mizeh, right? And do you know what that means? I didn't know that. It took me years till someone explained to me what that means. Right, Nishmar Mizeh. So what does that mean? So, he protected himself from this question. The Chachmei Sfard were very into this, which was, and this is explained in a sefer, I think it's called Derech Talmud or something like that, written in like 500 years ago, about the derech of learning of the Chachmei Sfard, like summarizing the way he had learned from his Rebbeim, was that you think of every possible question on the Gemara and every possible interpretation, and if a Rishon actively doesn't take an obvious one, right, then you try to figure out, well, why isn't it as obvious as I thought it was? And then you call that Nishmar Mizeh, meaning he took this interpretation, which you think is less than obvious, because he had a problem with the other one, and he protected his interpretation by taking the interpretation that doesn't fall into that pitfall, right? It's very hard for me to get into his mind and say, well, what other possibilities did he think was plausible, right? If he brought it up and rejected it, then that's one thing. Or if I knew that one of his Rebbeim had said it and he actively went away, then I know it's in his playbook. Sometimes it might just be that this is what he thought, right? Now, for the Ritva, therefore, he also thinks that they couldn't do it in the context of the Mikdash, because there it's much more direct. Because there is never a case of, now, you'll tell me, but what about now? We have the calendar. Now it doesn't matter, because what the Ritva will tell you is, look, once the law's in place, and our calendar is just sort of a mimicry of, okay, so the law can continue, or something like that. Right? He'll say it's a formality, we can do it. Now you'll tell me that's not so strong, I'll tell you you're right. Right? Maybe it's not, and that's why I mentioned to Rami, I think, and when we finish, I'll at least give you a 10-minute summary of this story. But in the 1950s, in fact, right, there was a Rabbi Schlesinger in Yerushalayim who said, we should bring back Tkiyat Shofar on Shabbos in Yerushalayim. Now, it depends on other things. He also got together a Sanhedrin to do it, right? He reconstituted a Bezdin so that you could rely, So this has several other factors in it.
Why do you want it only in Yerushalayim, not in the entire world?
Because then you get into because remember the sugya, but we haven't finished all of the factors here. But because the Gezeirah is only Makam HaMikdash, right? He wanted to say, oh well, Mikdash is Mikdash Yerushalayim.
Still really the Mikdash in that context.
What?
Is the Mikdash really still the Mikdash in that context?
Well, that's Machlokas. That's next year, right? That's the Machlokas Rashi Rambam, which is what does Yerushalayim mean for these purposes? It's a fascinating Machloket. Right now I have a source sheet ready for you, but I'm hoping I don't have to give it to you, because I'm hoping against hope that after Shir you're supposed to get your Rambams, and then I can show you Stiras and Rambams, and we can deal with this. Because the Rambam says one thing in Hilchos Shofar, another thing in Hilchos Sukkah, a different thing in Perush Mishnayos. It's a whole mess and a half, but it's wonderful. Yes, Yaakov.
Is the Gezeirah going to take place before or after the calendar?
Presumably before.
Do we know that?
It sounds like it's that early.
I mean,
But we're not sure.
possible.
It's possible that it sounds like. I mean, some of the Mefarshim think that it goes back even farther than Rabbah, and Rabbah just formalizes it, meaning it's before the full calendar is in effect. Yeah.
Maybe the full calendar.
Like meaning our calendar. Like our calendar for is as it is now is set a little bit later. Okay. So now the Ritva continues that my Megillah, right? Megillah, we didn't really need to do this, right? I'll just say this outside. By Megillah, we also don't read the Megillah on Shabbos, but he says there, the real reason that you're allowed to forbid it is because the whole thing to begin with is Derabanan. So don't get too wrapped up in it. Meaning, we might invoke Rabbah in that context, but he's like, don't think that, yes, the same type of motivation tells you not to not to read the Megillah on Shabbos, but there, we're not under the same strain, because it's just a Derabanan. So like, the fact that Derabanan's banned Derabanan, that's not such a big deal. Okay, but that's fundamentally the Ritva's contention. Okay?
Does anyone dispute that point? Like,
No.
the reason why we could just ban Megillah on Shabbos is because it's the Rabbanan? Is it that?
I mean, it's possible Megillah is not just Derabanan. So yes, the Meiri makes the claim on Megillah Yotes Amud Beis, I think, that it's actually Divrei Nevi'im. So it's a middle category. You like close your eyes and take a deep breath. I don't know why you're...
Like it's claiming that Megillah is like isn't there a month that's just that.
It's like Divrei Nevi'im. It's a middle category because it's in Nach. So like that gives it a middle status. The Meiri makes that claim. So others do also. Yeah, Ezra.
So nowadays, are people? What are like? I know there have been takanas since then, like since there was no
100%.
or anything. Is there any difference in the capabilities of the takanas that can be made nowadays from the community?
That is a very good question. That cannot be answered on one foot. The answer fundamentally is you can make takanot post Talmud, but in order for them to be effective, people have to accept them, and that may or may not happen.
But is there any other qualifications about what type of takana?
Not clear. Not clear that there is. Not clear that there isn't.
A bit, I guess ridiculous, I guess is the word, I don't know what other word to use, that we, in order to protect a Deoraita, you're able to make a takana that goes, that forces you not to fulfill a Deoraita, but nowadays, if we are able to, why don't we make a takana which is just getting rid of a takana? In order, because so basically we'll have you...
Oh, you're talking about this one specifically?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, that was the question. That was part of the argumentation in this 1950s psak was indeed some combination of something along those lines, which is, well, if we have good reason to uproot it and we can find a petach to paskin like this and so then we should take advantage of those because those loopholes in the takana to basically reverse the takana in certain circumstances. Yes, but it's complicated. And it's a very good question. It's such a good question that it doesn't, we can't answer it so quickly. But I'm going to try at the end of the sugya, to do it. I spent a long time last night reading through the full history of this monstrosity. It's 2 very long chapters in the Ger HaKodesh V'Mekudash over to Tukachinsky. It's Chelek Gimel, Prakim Chaf and Chaf Aleph. One on Shofar and one on Lulav. And the Rav Schlesinger advanced, I think it was at least 12 different arguments for his, and each of them had to be rebutted. So it's complicated, and that's just on the Shofar and Lulav case. You're asking the meta question, which is, much bigger than that. Yeah.
Why is the Ritva even bringing up Megillah on Shabbos?
It's the third case, it's Gezeirah de Rabbah, because the Gemara invokes Rabbah in that context. Right, and his argument is that it's not. Right, meaning his argument is that even though it says Rabbah, it's not really the same reason. It's like sure, but really they don't need that because it's rabbinic, so it doesn't really matter. Right, like that may be the motivation, but
We say that, so because it's rabbinic, that's why we say that.
Exactly. He's like, that, don't even ask me, that's easy. Right? Okay. So, how do you guys want to do this? Now, so, like I said, the most famous answer to this question, though arguably the most problematic, is the Taz. But there have been many answers. Do you want to go in historical order and see the other answers given by Rishonim first, and then devote time to the Taz? What do you want to do? Do you want to jump to the Taz, or do you want to first see what everyone else said to understand what the Taz is sort of jumping in? What? Okay, fine. So turn to the back here. So as I remember, I mentioned to you guys, I gave you the link if you are really into this Taz that we're about to see, and you love it so much you want to read a whole book just on the Taz. The book is just called HaTaz HaYadua, the Taz that everybody knows, because everybody knows this Taz, or you will by the end of this. Yeah, Adam, yeah.
Is this Taz building off of with the other sources?
No, the Taz doesn't quote anybody. The Meiri seems to say similar to the Taz, but the Taz may not have known that. But no, right? The Taz has his own thesis.
Okay, we didn't really understand.
No. He has his own thesis. But in the beginning of that book of the Taz HaYadua, so David Cohn says, before he goes into all the proofs and proofs against the Taz, he notes that the Rishonim, as we already saw in the Ritva, were bothered by this question. Right? Why don't we make a Gezeirah and forbid any mitzvah on Shabbos that might lead to carrying? Why do we say it only in certain circumstances? But they didn't say what the Taz said. So what did they say? So again, he just noted that if you want a summary, and I took him up on it, and I found the book he was quoting, and this, I think it's the Otzer Rishonim or something like that just goes basically a summary of the answers that different Rishonim gave to this question. Okay, so let's see what we got here. Okay, so starting at the first full paragraph, right? Like I just did a screenshot. So the first full paragraph, Katzvat Tosfos, yeah. So Katzvat Tosfos in Megillah, Avol Mila b'Shabbat ein lidchot. Now, by the way, why is Mila always the one that everyone invokes as their counter, right? As their question to what?
That seems to be the most clear case.
Correct, right? Because Mila is very clear. The Gemara says you do it even on Shabbos, even midirabanan, even though there's an explicit machlokes in the Gemara about how many things you can violate in advance. You're allowed to, we paskin, you're allowed to perform the Mila, but you're not allowed to carry things to the Mila. Only the Mila itself is doche, but not carrying, right? Not heating up water, not all those things. It's a machlokes in the Gemara between Rav and the Chachamim, but we don't paskin that way. Well, but this is the why everyone's asking. Is that Mila, we know you're not allowed to carry. Well, that's how we paskin. You're not allowed to carry things to Mila. You're only allowed to perform the Mila itself, and yet we let you do the Mila on Shabbos. So that's why everyone's asking for Mila, right? The Ritva, his answer is there's no suffix, there's no petach. But this is the question that everyone wants to know. So he writes, so Katzvat Tosfos ben Megillah. Avol Mila b'Shabbat ein lidchot. Da chamira. Shechein nichratu aleh yud gimel brito v'gam ein da mal elam kein avi baki de sakana yesh b'davar. He gives two reasons. What are his two reasons? This is a quote. What are his reasons? Reason one, Mila is really important. That's it. Answer one is Mila is really important. There are 13 britot tied up with Brit Milah, 13 expressions of covenant, and therefore, if you go back to our formulation at the beginning, the cost to the halachic system, right? Meaning, Tosfos' first answer focuses on cost, right? Which is telling you not to do a Milah in the right time is the cost of forbidding Milah is so great that it's not worth doing that. It's worth taking the risk rather than incurring that cost. Right? That's his first answer. Mila is important. That's it. Therefore, according to him, does it fit the right pattern? Sure. Should you have forbidden it? Maybe. Why don't we? Because we don't want to forbid Mila. Zeu, sof sipor. Mila is really important. Get over it. Yeah.
I understand the logic for saying that Mila is very important, but at the same time, there's no real metrics to measure.
Correct.
So
very good.
It's impossible to say this.
Very good. No, that's not true. You think see, you made a jump there. It's the fact that it's hard to have a metric. That's true.
Yeah.
The fact that, but again, see, this is one of those things that as I said, legislation is messy. You're right. Is there a good standard? Maybe not. Is there a predictive standard? Maybe not. Is Tosfot saying a predictive thing that you could use in any other context? Absolutely not. He's just being descriptive and saying, Chazal didn't by Mila. And now he's saying, why not? Answer one, he's speculating, because Mila is really important. That's it. You're right. And that's why it was important for me to give the little introduction to legislation, which is, the answer is that legislation is a little bit messy. And Tosfot's first answer is that it must be that on balance, Chazal said, the cost of limiting Mila is too great, and therefore it's worth the risk. Is there a risk? There's a risk. Yeah, in a chanami. Right? Answer two is a different axis. What's Tosfos' second answer? Tosfos' second answer is Ein Adam Mal Ela Imkein Baki Disakana Yesh B'Davar. His second answer, if we want to use our categories in the beginning, his first answer is on the cost axis. What's his second one? His second answer is on the danger axis, which is anybody can blow shofar. Look, right? We have a shear of 8. 2 people know to blow shofar. Do any of you, the rest of you know to blow shofar? 2.5. 2 and 2 halves. 3 people.
I go for a quarter.
Okay. 3 1/4 people out of 8 know how to blow shofar, okay? So that's pretty good. How many of you would be comfortable giving a bris milah?
As long as it's not deaf in my own child.
You're comfortable? You're good at this? You know right now you could do it.
Well,
I get penalized for doing it wrong.
my Gemara Rebbe was he had diagrams on.
Great. So Tosfos' second answer is, look. Tosfos' answer is basically goes like this. Anybody can blow the shofar, anybody can shake lulav. And therefore, telling people to do it even on Shabbos runs a bigger risk, because when you're telling the whole world, go blow shofar, take the lulav, you're running the risk that someone's going to forget about carrying on Shabbos. But Mila is, in general, a profession of a limited number of people. And since that's the case, often those people are a little bit more educated, know what they're doing, and therefore they're less likely to make a mistake because, right? And therefore he says, since Mila is a sakana, and not so many people do it, therefore it's not worth making the Gezeirah, because the chances that the mohel will mess up is less likely than the average person on the street will mess up. That's all. So this answer is on the risk axis. Yeah.
Okay. Isn't it still a problem? Because the problem isn't that the bucky. It's not necessarily that only the bucky himself will carry it, like the shofar, for example. It's that somebody will carry the shofar too. So couldn't the same still apply to bris milah, where somebody will carry the tools for the bris too?
So no, actually, in Dafka, the way it's formulated by shofar is that the person who doesn't know how to blow will take the shofar to learn how to blow. It's Dafka focused on the non-expert, right?
Yeah. So why can't the same thing happen here? Yeah. Why can't the same thing happen here where somebody else brings the tools for the bris milah?
It could be, right? But it could be. But Tosfos is just saying it's less likely the mohel has his kit, right? Like when my oldest son, right, he got it. He had his bris from a family of mohelim in Washington Heights, and it's third generation. They've been mohelim, and they are like the best mohelim in the universe. They're tzaddikim gemurim, like they do it as volunteer, like he's like a businessman, he does it before work and goes out, but they are like the most organized people in the world. Like, you call him up and say, I had a baby boy, the bris is whatever, and he says, okay, go online, go to this website, brisbag.com, I've already arranged a free, so he got together a bunch of mohelim, it's like a diaper bag, pre-filled with everything you need before the bris, for the bris, to bandages for after the bris. A deal with FedEx to rush always at a 48-hour thing. Call them, they will deliver it to your door, bring that to the bris, tell me the exact minute you want me at the bris, right? And bring a bottle of wine in a cup, and that's it, right? And he shows up, in, out, you're not, there's no mohelim are a good mohel, knows what he's doing, right? They are, so you're less worried that Chilul Shabbos will come from it. One of my wife's uncles she said it was nerve-wracking. He did give a bris with a how-to book open in front of him. He happens to be a surgeon, so it's a little bit less,
You say he's a surgeon, was he?
He's a fertility surgeon. So Dafka, he does do things that are even more precise than that, but for bris milah, he actually had the how-to book open while he was doing it, so that is a bit of a nerve-wracking thing to do.
The thing is that you could be licensed to do surgery without ever having done surgery. I know my father, apparently he's
he hadn't done this thing. He hadn't done a bris before. That's why he was reading up on it. But he happened to be someone who was experienced. It's not like I wouldn't. I don't even look. I can't. I just close my eyes, look the other way. I can't. It's. But yeah.
They don't have to worry about you carrying the baby.
Or carrying the baby, or whatever.
Is that an issue if it's alive?
Yes.
At that age, yeah. At that age, for sure.
Oh, but if they can't walk themselves, it's not an issue.
Right, and the question of when Chai Nosei Atzmo takes effect.
So it can't walk by itself. So carrying cats or dogs, your pets, you're allowed.
So Chai Nosei Atzmo, it's still ushered midirabanan, possibly. Animals are different. Animals have a lot of issues with it. Animals are a complicated sugya. Ray Jachter has a summary of it online from an old RJJ journal.
Ray Jachter?
Yes. Yeah, so he has an old article on dealing with animals animals in halacha, pets in halacha, and he deals with that. Shabbos is a bit complicated with pets, muktzah questions and etc. Okay, what time is it, by the way, guys?
12 o'clock exactly.
Okay. I'm trying not to frustrate myself. I was like, maybe I'll do this in one day, but no. No, okay. It's okay. It's okay. We'll try to finish it, not tomorrow, guys, actually. You have Shir Klali tomorrow. Right, Reb Chaim Moser is giving Shir Klali tomorrow. So,
Like, sure, regular time, sure, close.
he's giving, yeah. He's actually coming in.
Well, he came in.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Fine. Yeah. As you can see, right, the reason I gave it to you is it just has like 10 different answers, and then we can get to the Taz's, which I really want to focus on, because the Taz's answer is one of the most problematic. It's quoted all the time, but it's very problematic because it goes against a lot of things. But it's important to know because it's well known, whatever. Okay, fine. We'll continue. You get the last word, Ezra, yeah.
You know what the schedule